So there I was, third observer clicks of the Military Academy of Vornath Prime, watching another batch of recruits shuffle into Instructor Ven's combat assessment hall. You know the type. Fresh scales, eager mandibles, that insufferable confidence that comes from never having faced actual mortality. I'd seen thousands of them over my 12 cycles as administrative staff, and honestly, most blended together like nutrition paste. But this one? This human? Oh, she was different, and not in a good way. Her name was Lieutenant Mae Volkov, recently transferred from some backwater Earth garrison that nobody in the civilized galaxy had bothered to catalogue properly. She stood barely 5.5 feet tall, which by Vornath standards made her approximately the size of a particularly ambitious child. Her skin had this weird peachy tone that kept changing colors depending on temperature or emotion or who knows what. Mammals are strange, and while everyone else carried the standard issue plasma rifles and energy blades that hummed with barely contained power, this lunatic had strapped to her hip what appeared to be a chunk of sharpened metal. I'm not joking. Actual, literal, forged metal. The kind of primitive nonsense our ancestors used before we discovered how to split atoms with our thoughts. Well, okay, not literally with thoughts, but you get the point. It had a worn leather grip, a crossguard that looked like it had been hammered by someone with only a vague understanding of symmetry, and a blade that was so old it had this dull grey patina that screamed, I belong in a museum, not a battlefield. The other recruits noticed immediately. Of course they did. By the Seven Suns, wheezed Cadet Throk, a massive Krellian, whose species prided itself on having evolved past the need for most internal organs. He pointed one of his 4 arms at Mae's hip. Is that a cooking implement? Laughter rippled through the hall. Even I had to suppress what humans call a smile, though my species shows amusement through a slight inflation of our throat sacs. Professional neutrality and all that. Mae didn't react. Just stood there with her hands clasped behind her back, staring straight ahead with those unsettlingly small human eyes. No witty comeback. No defensive posture, nothing, which somehow made it worse because it meant she either didn't understand she was being mocked, or she understood perfectly and simply didn't care. Instructor Ven slithered into the room, his serpentine lower body making that distinctive whisper against the polished floor that always preceded his arrival. Ven was old. Not academy old, not even military old. He was ancient. Rumor had it he'd been an instructor before the Vornath expansion, back when we were still fighting the Skorlix horde for control of our own star system. His scales had faded to a pale silver, and one of his eyes was a cybernetic replacement that glowed with a faint amber light. Recruits! His voice cut through the laughter like a plasma blade through butter. Everyone snapped to attention. Today you will demonstrate basic combat proficiency against training drones. You will be evaluated on speed, accuracy, tactical thinking, and your ability to not die like idiots. The drones are set to level 3 aggression, which means they will attempt to maim you, but probably won't succeed at killing you, probably. He paused, letting that sink in. You will be called one at a time. Impress me or I will personally recommend your immediate reassignment to Waste Reclamation Services. Are we clear? A chorus of yes, instructor, echoed through the hall. The first few demonstrations were exactly what you'd expect. Cadet Throk charged in with all the grace of a collapsing building, relying on his species' natural armor and redundant biology to simply tank damage while pulverizing drones with his fists. Effective. If you enjoy the strategic complexity of a falling rock, he scored adequately. Next came Cadet Yira, a Felith whose species had literally evolved for combat. 6 limbs, each ending in retractable energy blades, plus the ability to process visual information at roughly 4 times the speed of most species. She moved through the drone formation like a dancer, all fluid grace and calculated strikes. The drones didn't stand a chance. She scored in the 92nd percentile. Then came a few more recruits. Some passed. Some failed, spectacularly, including one poor zealot who apparently forgot that his species' electrical defense mechanism doesn't work when you're standing in a puddle of your own nervous sweat. The drones dragged him off to medical while he sobbed about his career being over. It probably was. Finally, Ven's cybernetic eyes swiveled to focus on Mae. "Lieutenant Volkov, you're up." Mae stepped forward. I noticed she moved differently than the others. Humans have this bipedal gait that looks inherently unstable, like they're constantly on the verge of falling over, but she had a fluidity to her steps that suggests extensive training. Or maybe just a good sense of balance. Hard to say with humans. She entered the combat zone, and the observation screens flickered to life, showing multiple angles of the training ground. The drones activated, 6 of them, hovering in a hexagonal formation. They were nasty little things, about 2 feet across, bristling with stun weapons and kinetic impactors. At level 3 aggression, they'd coordinate their attacks, probe for weaknesses, and exploit any tactical errors with ruthless efficiency. Mae reached down and drew her blade. The sound it made, that soft metallic whisper, as steel cleared leather. Every recruit in that hall suddenly got very quiet, because there's something primal about that sound, something that predates energy weapons and plasma technology and all the civilized tools of warfare. It's the sound of violence made personal, of killing made intimate. And every sentient creature in that room suddenly remembered that their ancestors, regardless of species, had once killed each other with sharp pieces of metal. The drones opened fire. Stun bolts lanced through the air, crackling with blue energy. Mae moved, not fast by Philith standards, but fast enough. She twisted, dropped low, came up inside the firing pattern of the nearest drone and swung. The blade connected with a sound like a bell being struck. The drone's chassis crumpled, its anti-gravity field collapsed, and it dropped to the floor in a shower of sparks and shattered components. "Lucky hit," someone muttered behind me. I think it was Throck. The remaining 5 drones recalibrated, adapting their tactics. They spread out, began firing in coordinated bursts, trying to pin Mae down with overlapping fields of fire. Standard anti-infantry tactics. Should have worked. It didn't. Mae moved like water, finding the path of least resistance. She flowed between the stun bolts, her blade always moving, always positioned. When a drone got too close, that primitive chunk of metal would flash out, and suddenly there'd be 1 fewer drone in operation. No fancy energy discharge, no dramatic explosions. Just the workmanlike destruction of military hardware using nothing but leverage, timing, and a really sharp edge. 4 drones left. 3, the last 2 tried a pincer movement, coming at her from opposite sides simultaneously. Mae dropped into a crouch, planted one hand on the ground for stability, and swept her blade in a low arc that caught the first drone's undercarriage. It spiraled out of control, crashed into its partner, and both tumbled to the ground in a tangle of damaged hardware. Silence. Mae stood, breathing only slightly harder than when she'd started, and calmly sheathed her blade. The whole engagement had taken maybe 40 seconds. Instructor Ven stared at her for a long moment, his cybernetic eye whirring as it cycled through different visual spectrums, probably trying to figure out if what he'd just witnessed had actually happened. Finally he spoke. "Adequate." Mae nodded once. "Thank you, Instructor." As she walked back to formation, Ven gestured for her to approach his desk. The rest of us watched, trying not to look like we were eavesdropping, which of course meant everyone was absolutely eavesdropping. I have exceptional hearing, so I caught most of it. "That blade," Ven said quietly, his voice carrying a tone I'd never heard from him before. "Was that respect from Ven? Where did you acquire it?" "It's a family heirloom, sir. Been passed down for 6 generations. Do you know its history?" "Some, sir. My great-great-great-grandmother carried it during the Titan suppressions on Mars, before Mars was properly terraformed, before we had reliable energy weapons that could function in that environment." Ven's functioning eye narrowed. His cybernetic one continued its eternal amber glow. He leaned closer, and I barely caught his next words. "That metal was forged to cut Titans, Lieutenant. I've seen blades like that exactly twice in my life. Both times the wielder was someone you wanted on your side when the universe decided to get ugly. Keep it sharp. You'll need it before this tour is over." Mae's face remained impassive, but I noticed her hand drift unconsciously to the blade's grip, a protective gesture that spoke volumes. She returned to formation, and Ven dismissed the class. As everyone filed out, chattering about the demonstration and what Ven might have said, I found myself reviewing the footage again, watching that primitive blade carve through advanced military hardware like it was made of tissue paper. And I remembered something my own instructor had told me years ago, back when I was young and stupid and thought superior technology always won. He'd said that humanity had crawled its way out of Earth's gravity well using nothing but controlled explosions and mathematics, that they'd survived ice ages, plagues, global wars and their own worst impulses through nothing but sheer bloody-minded refusal to quit. Looking at that blade, at the calm certainty in Mae Volkov's eyes, I believed him. 3 days after Mae's demonstration, the Academy received a priority alert that made every administrator's secondary heart skip a beat. Well, those of us with secondary hearts anyway. The humans just got pale and started swearing, which I'd learnt was their species' way of acknowledging that the universe had decided to be inconvenient. Captain Drevik, our station commander and a veteran of more campaigns than I had appendages, appeared on every screen simultaneously. His crystalline face, normally so composed, showed visible fractures of stress along his jawline. That alone told me something catastrophic was happening. All personnel, battle stations. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. We have a Code Vermilion situation developing in the outer mining sector. Code Vermilion. I felt my throat sacs deflate completely. That was the code for exactly one type of threat, Rogue Titan. The briefing room filled within minutes. Instructors, senior cadets, support staff like myself, everyone who could hold a weapon or operate a console. The main display showed a massive shape moving through the asteroid field, and even on screen it was terrifying. Titans were supposed to be extinct. They were bioengineered war machines created by the Skorlix Horde 3 centuries ago, during the last Great Expansion War. 50 feet tall, armored hide thick enough to shrug off orbital bombardment, claws that could tear through starship hulls, and a nervous system so redundant that you could blow off half its body and it would keep fighting. The Horde had designed them to be unstoppable. They'd succeeded a bit too well. When the Horde fell, most Titans were destroyed or died of starvation. But a few, maybe a dozen, had survived in deep space, hibernating in asteroid fields or dead moons, waiting, hoping, hunting. This one had been awakened by the mining operations blasting schedule, and now it was heading straight for the Academy station, probably attracted by the heat signatures and electromagnetic emissions. To a Titan, we looked like prey. Naval response time is 48 hours, Captain Drevik announced, his voice steady despite the fractures spreading across his face. Stress really did a number on crystalline species. We need to evacuate non-essential personnel and mount a defensive holding action until the fleet arrives. Instructor Ven, you'll coordinate the combat response. Use whatever resources you need. Ven slithered forward, his silver scales catching the emergency lighting in an almost hypnotic pattern. Understood, Captain. I'll need volunteers from the advanced combat class. This won't be a simulation. Every cadet stepped forward. Even the Zelnith who'd failed the drone test, still bandaged from his electrical mishap. You had to respect that kind of courage, even if it was probably rooted in youthful stupidity and a fundamental misunderstanding of mortality. Ven's eyes swept across them, then stopped on Mae. She stood quietly in the third row, her hand resting on that ancient blade's grip. Volkov, front and center. Mae moved through the crowd. Several cadets shifted away from her, like they could sense something dangerous in her proximity. Prey instincts are funny that way. Sir, that blade of yours, your ancestor used it on Titans? Yes, sir. During the Mars suppressions, the early terraforming teams encountered 3 Skorlix stragglers. Energy weapons kept overheating in the dust storms, so they went old school. My great-great-great-grandmother, Lieutenant Colonel Sonya Volkov, killed 2 of them with this blade. She patted the weapon. The third one killed her, but her squad finished it off. The room got very quiet. Even Captain Drevik's fractures stopped spreading. Ven's cybernetic eye focused on Mae with an intensity that made several recruits take an involuntary step back. Show me the blade. Mae drew it slowly. In the emergency lighting, the steel looked different than it had in the training hall. There were patterns in the metal, subtle waves and whirls that suggested the thing had been folded hundreds of times during forging. And along the blade's length, I noticed something I'd missed before, tiny symbols etched into the metal, so small they were barely visible. Human script, maybe, or something older. Then extended one claw, ran it gently along the flat of the blade. A soft ringing sound filled the room like a tuning fork struck in a cathedral. The sound went on longer than physics should have allowed, resonating in ways that made my bones ache. Damascus pattern welded steel, Ven said quietly, with a core of something I don't recognize. Tungsten carbide maybe, or something worse. The Titan's armor is organic, layered, designed to disperse energy weapons. But this? He tapped the blade again. This is mass, velocity, sheer force, the old ways. The ways that worked before we got clever. He looked up at Mae and something passed between them. An understanding, maybe. Or a recognition. You'll be on point when it reaches the station. You and whoever's stupid enough to volunteer for your squad. I'll go, said a voice from the crowd. It was Throck, the massive Krellian who'd mocked Mae's blade just 3 days earlier. He stepped forward, all 4 arms flexing nervously. I've got redundant biology. Hard to kill. Makes sense. Me too, said Yira, the Felith combat specialist. Someone needs to keep the humans from doing something heroically suicidal. Mae almost smiled at that. Almost. Within minutes, she had a squad. Throck, Yira, a Vornath named Slicks, who specialized in demolitions, and 2 other humans from the support staff who apparently had combat training. One was an engineer named Marcus Trent, who carried a plasma cutter like it was a holy relic. The other was a medic called Dr. Lynn Harper, who'd seen action during the Fringe rebellions and had the scars to prove it. They geared up in the armory while the rest of us prepared the station's defenses. Mae checked her blade one more time, tested the edge against a piece of scrap metal. The steel bit deep, parting the alloy like it wasn't even there. You really think that's going to work? Throck asked, securing his own weapons, a pair of heavy kinetic hammers that could pulverize rock. Against a Titan, Mae sheathed the blade with that soft, deadly whisper. My ancestor carved her name into Mars with this blade, into the bones of monsters that were supposed to be unkillable. It worked then, and if it doesn't work now, then you'll have plenty of time to say you told me so while the Titan eats us. Yira laughed at that, a chittering sound that her species made when they appreciated dark humor. I like you, human. You're appropriately pessimistic about survival odds. The Titan hit the outer hull 40 minutes later. The impact sent shockwaves through the entire station. Alarms screamed. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut. And through the cameras we watched as 50 feet of armored nightmare tore through our defensive plating like it was tissue paper. It was beautiful, in the way that hurricanes and volcanic eruptions are beautiful. All that terrible power moving with single-minded purpose. Its hide was the color of old blood, layered with chitinous plates that overlapped like scale armor. 6 legs, each ending in claws the size of a human torso. A head that was mostly mouth, filled with teeth designed for rending metal and bone with equal efficiency. And it was heading straight for the main habitation ring, where 3,000 personnel were evacuating as fast as physically possible. Mae's squad moved to intercept. They met it in Junction 7, a large cargo bay that gave them room to maneuver. The Titan crashed through the blast doors like they were decorative curtains, its roar shaking loose debris from the ceiling. Up close on the ground-level feeds, it was even more terrifying. You could see the old scars on its hide, the places where weapons had failed to penetrate. Battle damage from wars fought before most of us were born. Spread out. Mae's voice came through the comms, calm and clear. Don't let it focus on one target. Throck, go for the legs. Yura, eyes and sensory organs. Slicks, if you get an opening, put explosives in its mouth. Everyone else, stay alive and make noise. They moved like they'd trained together for years instead of minutes. Throck charged, hammers swinging, striking at the Titan's forward legs, with impacts that sounded like thunder. The Titan screamed, turned toward him, massive jaws opening. Yira hit it from the side, her energy blades carving at one of its cluster eyes. Eyes, eggshell sprayed, black and thick. The Titan thrashed, caught her with a claw that sent her tumbling across the deck. She hit hard but rolled, came up bleeding but functional. Mae moved in. She was so small compared to the Titan. Insignificant, really. A mouse attacking a tank, but she moved with absolute certainty, blade held in a two-handed grip, closing distance while the Titan was distracted. The blade flashed silver in the emergency lighting. Mae struck at the joint where the Titan's front leg met its body, where the armor plates had to flex and therefore couldn't be as thick. The steel bit deep, parted chitin and muscle, struck bone. The Titan's roar changed pitch, became something closer to pain than rage. It tried to turn, to bring those massive jaws to bear on this tiny creature that had hurt it. But Throg was there, hammers crashing into its other front leg, and Slicks, that crazy Vornath, had climbed onto the Titan's back and was placing shaped charges along its spine. Mae struck again. Same leg, deeper this time. I watched through the cameras as that ancient blade, forged in fire and quenched in oil by human hands centuries ago, carved through bioengineered armor that was supposed to be impenetrable, each strike precise, economical, no wasted motion. The Titan's leg buckled. It crashed forward, off balance, its weight becoming a liability. Marcus, the engineer, took his chance and fired his plasma cutter directly into the wound Mae had created. Superheated plasma flooded into the Titan's body cavity. The smell, even through the environmental filters, must have been apocalyptic. Now, Slicks shouted, and triggered the charges. The explosion was contained, channeled inward by the Titan's own armor. Its spine shattered, nervous system severed. The great beast collapsed, still alive but paralyzed, its remaining legs twitching uselessly. Mae walked calmly to its head. The Titan's eyes, the ones Yira hadn't destroyed, tracked her approach. There might have been recognition there, or maybe just animal fear. Hard to say. She raised her blade one final time. For Sonya Volkov, she said quietly. And everyone else who fought these things with nothing but steel and courage. The blade fell. The Titan stopped moving. Silence filled the junction, broken only by the sound of dripping Itcher and the squad's heavy breathing. Then Throg started laughing, a deep, booming sound that echoed off the walls. Yira joined in with her chittering. Even Slicks made the Vornath equivalent of relieved amusement, which sounds like rocks grinding together. Mae just cleaned her blade on the Titan's hide and sheathed it. By the time naval reinforcements arrived 30 hours later, we'd already resumed normal operations. The Titan's corpse was being studied by xenobiology teams, who couldn't believe something that size had been brought down by a squad of cadets armed with what they kept calling primitive weapons. Instructor Ven found me in the observation deck, watching the scientists swarm over the body. "You recorded everything?" he asked. "Every second. Multiple angles." "Good. Send it to Fleet Command, and to the human embassy. They should know that their ancient ways still have value." He paused, his cybernetic eye glowing in the darkness. "I've fought in the Skorlix Wars," Observer clicks. "I've seen what Titans can do. I've seen entire battalions destroyed by a single one of those things, and I've seen exactly 2 other humans carry blades like Volkov's. What happened to them? They lived. Everyone around them lived. The Titans died." He turned to leave, then stopped. "There's a reason humanity crawled out of their gravity well and made it to the stars, despite having no natural weapons. No armor, no advantages. They're too stubborn to accept that anything is unkillable, too practical to abandon tools that work just because they're old. And when they find something that needs killing, they do it with whatever's available." He gestured at the Titan's corpse with one claw. "They mocked her blade, called it primitive, obsolete, a relic." His voice carried something that might have been pride. "But that metal was forged to cut Titans. And today, like every day since humans figured out how to fold steel, it did exactly what it was made to do." I watched as Mae walked past, heading to medical to get checked out. The blade hung at her hip, that ancient piece of human stubbornness and violence, catching the light. She caught me staring and nodded once before disappearing down the corridor. Somewhere in the debris field outside, the naval fleet began establishing a perimeter, but we didn't need them anymore. The monster was dead. killed by a woman who weighed less than one of its claws, armed with nothing but sharpened metal and the accumulated fury of 6 generations of humans who refused to accept that anything was impossible. I started drafting my report, trying to find words that would adequately capture what I'd witnessed. But how do you explain to people who've never seen it that sometimes the old ways are the best ways, that progress isn't always about better technology, but about remembering what worked when everything else failed? In the end, I just attached the video and wrote one sentence. They mocked her blade. They were wrong. And somewhere in the archives of galactic military history, another story got added to humanity's file. Another reminder that the species that conquered Earth with nothing but stones and stubbornness hadn't forgotten how to fight when it mattered. The blade that was forged to cut titans had done its job, and Mae Volkov, like her ancestor before her, had carved her name into legend with steel and blood and absolute certainty.